Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. Hong Kong Confidential is brought to you by Teresa's Turkish Towels. Teresa imports the finest 100% Turkish cotton towels that dry very quickly, making them perfect for Hong Kong's humid climate. Say goodbye to the traditional smelly and stinky towels and try the colourful and fresh selections available online or in Teresa's Wan Chai store. Use the promo code CONFIDENTIAL online or mention this podcast when you visit in person to receive $100 off your entire order when you order 2 or more towels. With 100% satisfaction guaranteed or your money back, the only thing you've got to lose are the musty smells that permeate traditional terry towels. Visit www.hkturkish.com in order to get the address and directions to Teresa's semi-hidden location. A listener note. Some of the topics in this podcast may be disturbing to some listeners. We discuss topics such as rape, abuse, and eating disorders. Listener discretion is advised. Today I'm here with Sophia. Hi Sophia, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you. Can you tell me a little bit about your life?
Gosh, where do I start? Well, I'll start from the beginning. I was born in England, in Colchester in Essex. I was one of 5 children. I've got 4 brothers and I'm the only girl and the youngest.
Oh gosh,
so, yeah,
were you bullied?
I was totally bullied to the point that one day I went to school and one of the teachers asked me if I'd been beaten up by my parents. It was that bad.
Oh.
Literally like bruises all over my leg, head to toe, arms, everything. But now we're older, we all love each other, so that's good.
Okay, that is good.
That is good.
Thank goodness.
And then we lived in Essex for 12, 13 years. And then we moved to Cornwall when my dad retired and he became a farmer. And then they lived in Cornwall for 15, 20 years. And then they moved back to Essex. And then my father died and then she moved back to Cornwall.
How old were you when your father died?
It was only 2 years ago, so two and a bit years ago. So I've flash forwarded a lot.
Yeah. That's a pretty quick life story.
We can kind of go backwards.
Yeah.
But that in a nutshell, kind of where I've come from, sort of Essex, Cornwall, but all in England. And then we moved to Hong Kong when I was just married. So I just got married in 2006 and we moved in 2007 and this is kind of our home.
All right. So you've been here for a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
But I suppose one of the main reasons I wanted to come and talk to you was about sort of the bits in between.
What was your relationship like with your mum when you were young?
Do you know, when I was little, it was pretty good. I thought she was just a normal mother and, you know, we'd be on our own quite a lot because my father was commuting from London to Essex and both my brothers were at boarding school. We were more friends than mother. There was not really a mother-daughter relationship. I think that's where it all started kind of going wrong, was sort of puberty age. She was not one to talk about anything. In fact, she used to call the period the curse.
Oh, did she? That's very old-fashioned.
Oh, the curse, and never talked about it. And so I was really very unprepared when all that happened. And I now look back on it and I'm kind of like, God, with my daughter, I want to talk to her about everything and anything, and we can discuss anything. Nothing's off the table. And I think at 13, and I then hit acne and got really bad acne. And as the only daughter, my mother was so disappointed. Her life revolved around looks. She wanted to always look fantastic and fabulous. And she was very beautiful when she was younger. She always had men after her, although she was married to my father for 20 odd years. So for her, I was a very important piece of her in her life to make sure I was beautiful looking, right weight, etc., etc. And when I wasn't, that was when things used to go kind of wrong. And I remember the first thing when I really noticed when Mum was starting to be a bit horrible was probably when I hit puberty and got acne. And I got really bad acne, and Mum turned around and just said, God, out of all the children, bloody hell, my daughter's got acne. You look like a pizza.
Oh,
and
that's so devastating.
And I just remember going upstairs and bawling my eyes out. And she took me to so many specialists to try and get rid of the acne. And then I ended up having to go on Roaccutane, which is a really powerful drug. It did clear them up, but it's not great for your system, and it can also trigger depression.
Oh, and is that what happened to you?
Well, I don't know, because at the age of 13, 14, I went to boarding school when my parents moved down to Cornwall. And I went to drama dance school. So it was full of lots of body conscious people and people in leotards and all these ballerinas all around us. And I was in the drama group. And our drama group were kind of known as the sort of losers. Kind of, we're in our baggy trousers and walking around and looking at all the halls with all these ballerinas and tap dancers and stuff. But I very quickly dropped loads and loads of weight.
Deliberately?
To start with, not. I think it was being in a boarding school environment where you're not actually able to get hold of food all the time. And I probably was a little bit chubby as a teenager. I think most teenagers tend to be.
Yeah, it's normal, isn't it? Yeah, with your hormones.
Exactly. And then it became deliberate. And I remember the first time I sort of really lost loads of weight and saw Mum and Dad. Mum just turned around and said, oh, gosh, you look amazing. And I, of course, for me, wow, I've got some praise from Mum. This is amazing. So I'll just carry on doing it.
So it reinforces that behaviour, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think at one stage when I was at school, I was eating around 100 calories a day.
That's all?
Yeah, just to...
What did that consist of? Like an apple?
Oh, half an apple for breakfast, half a piece of toast. If I could get away with nothing at lunch, I would. And then I would go swimming in the evening as much as possible. I'd go for runs, I'd do anything. And as long as I could see the gap between my legs when I sat down, that was the main thing. I could get my whole hand around my thigh at one stage.
And were you continuously getting praise for being slim and stuff like that? Or did people recognise something was going wrong?
At school, it was quite rife with lots of anorexics in the school, but one of my best friends was anorexic at the same time as I was, but I was always jealous of her because I thought she was thinner than me, and she always thought I was thinner than her, and so we had this sort of battle between each other secretly because neither of us admitted we were anorexic until later on in life.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I never thought I was anorexic, and I remember when my house mistress rang my parents to say, look, this is quite serious now, she's lost a lot of weight, and my house mistress was probably, I'd say, obese. She was a really big lady. So my parents didn't believe her. And every time I went home, Mum just used to think I looked fabulous. So even though I was, I think, 5 to 6 stone, maybe, between 5
That's
and 6
so low.
stone.
But your mum didn't have any concern because she was so obsessed with you looking slim.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I thought that was great too. So I just carried on. And when I'd go home, I would eat for 2 or 3 days properly, and then I'd starve myself when I got back to school. So I kind of tricked them. Anorexia is one of those horrible, horrible things to have that you can't stop it. You can't click a finger and say, just eat some food and get on with it. And that's what I've also learned from before I was anorexic. I always used to think of people who are anorexic as just being self-conscious and so into themselves that they wanted to lose weight and look beautiful, and why can't they just eat a burger and be fine? But when you're actually in the moment of being anorexic, A, you don't believe you're anorexic, and B, you don't think you're thin. That's the worst, and that's what's so annoying is when I look back on how thin I was or skinny I was, I never knew how skinny I was.
Well, it's a mental health issue, isn't it, where your mind plays tricks on you and you do not recognise how skinny you are, and no matter how small you get, you're still focused on areas that upset you. And
one of the funny things I also noticed is I've got no photos from back then.
Oh.
It's really interesting. No photos at all of me, apart from top upwards. Got no photos of me full length looking anorexic or anything.
Wow.
I've got any photos.
So were you ever actually diagnosed or taken to a doctor? What happened?
Well, I just went to my school doctor, who just, I suppose in those days, just said, asked me all the questions. I hadn't had my period for 3 years. My mum never asked me that either. You know, she never wanted to talk about stuff like that. She just wanted to bury things. And she was, you know, old-fashioned, don't need to talk about it, let's just put it in a box, bury it, and you just get on with life and you'll be fine later on.
It's a bit of a British cultural thing, isn't it? Have a cup of tea and get on with it.
And also because I never spoke to mum about things like periods and stuff, I was too embarrassed to talk about it. And, you know, talking to a doctor was even more mortifying.
Did you know something was wrong?
No, I was pulled in by my school to go to the doctors. I didn't want to go.
Right.
I didn't want to go at all, so I went in kicking and screaming. And that's when the phone call went home to my parents saying that I was anorexic and needed some kind of help. And amazingly, I went to see a therapist, I think, twice. And then it was nearing the end of my school, and I think I'd got out of just using excuses to not have to go to therapy. I still was really tiny, but I was eating more than normal. And then halfway through my A-levels, I just decided school wasn't for me, which is, again, another thing that interests me about my parents. So I called them up halfway through my A-levels and said, Mum and Dad, look, I hate this school and I want to be an actress. I just want to quit school now. If you can just pay for me to do 1 month's flat, or give me a flat for 1 month and pay for me to do a secretarial course in London or something to get me up on my feet so I can work as well as auditioning, then I want to do it.
And did they let you?
Yeah. They let me.
What?
Didn't even ask questions about it or anything, which I just find fascinating because there's no way in a million years I would let my children do that.
Drop out halfway through your A-levels.
And I was predicted 2 A's and a B.
What?
So I never did my A-levels, so I left halfway through.
Oh my gosh, are you looking back now resentful that they let that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I wished and I never went to university, so I started in London when I was 17, just 17. And I don't know if you know London very well, but it's a pretty lonely place. It's not like Hong Kong.
Sure.
You know, you turn up in London and people next door to you don't talk to you. Your neighbours don't talk to you. People on the bus don't talk to you.
You were in London without any qualifications, studying a secretarial course with an eating disorder and alone.
Yeah, well, luckily my elder brother had just finished university, so he just hit London at the same time as I did, and he was my total godsend. So he kind of pulled me into his group of friends. He's 5 years older than me, but by then you don't really there's no age gap difference. Yeah. So he pulled me into his group of friends. But I remember going out for the first time I went to work. So I did this 2-week secretarial course. So I had these big folders of PowerPoint, Excel, Word, you name it. And I just garbled my way through it. And the first job I got was working as a PA to the managing director of Universal Pictures. So I walked into his room, and honestly, I swear, my office was the size of my flat, if not bigger. And
wow.
I had my rucksack with all these files of Excel, Word, PowerPoint, because I didn't have a clue. I'd never worked in an office before. I didn't even know what an office was. So I walked into this office, and they bunged things at me left, right, and centre, and I didn't have a clue what to do. And I remember one time being told to hire a courier for something. So I just called up the Yellow Pages and booked a courier and took the books down that they wanted a courier and stuck a post-it note on them. I got bollocked for that and fired.
Did you? You got fired?
I only lasted 2 days there.
Oh my God.
But yeah, working is a very steep learning curve. But slowly and surely I started meeting friends and did the secretarial thing whilst auditioning for drama schools. And I think I realised at that stage that drama school was going to be a bit of a nightmare. It would have been too expensive for me to do, and I would be living in a hovel for the rest of my life. And as you probably know, I mean, trying to be an actor or an actress is just impossible. It's like singing, really.
Yeah, sure.
So I decided to stop that. Then at the same time, got this amazing job working for Evening Standard and the Mail on Sundays. So I sort of landed on my feet and then went into advertising.
Oh gosh.
So whilst I was in London, I then sort of found food and pints of beer.
Right, yeah.
And so my weight went from 0 to quite big. I mean, for me, I was probably a size 12, 14. And of course, my mother just couldn't stand that. So I remember going down one time to Cornwall and seeing her, and I was just going for a bit of cheese, and she just stopped me and put her hand on my hand and said, no more. And would kind of look at me and say, you know, what's going on now? Why are you so big? It's ridiculous.
At size 12?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and then there was this one point where when I was working for the Mail on Sunday a few years later, that I had a black tie do to go to. And I bought this dress from Caramel, was really proud of it, loved it, took it down to Cornwall for the weekend to show my mum. And I put it on and she just looked at it and said, I'm just not quite sure it looks quite right. And you just look a bit fat in it, but let me try it on and I'll put it on and I'll show you why I don't like it. Bear in mind she's 55. She goes and puts this dress on and then starts walking around putting high heels on and says, I actually love this dress. It looks really, really good on me. I'm much better on me than it does on you. So why don't I buy it from you?
Oh, and did you let her?
Yeah, I did.
Oh
there was quite a big argument.
Was there?
Not in terms, I didn't want the dress back up to that, but in terms of just talking to me like that.
So you had called her on it, did you?
Yeah, I did. And I mean, she just said, well, you've got to look after yourself. You're never going to find a boyfriend if you're fat like that. And
oh my gosh, that's terrible things to say to a young daughter.
Yeah, really, really bad.
Really damaging, isn't it? Especially somebody who's been dealing with an eating disorder for years already.
I just don't think she realised what she was doing. She's just that sort of person who doesn't realise she's being damaging in any way. She thinks she's doing the right thing. She thinks she's probably saying the right things to
motivate you to be healthy.
Weight. Exactly. Yeah. And talking about my parents' relationship, about 2 years before that, just as I was coming up to London, in between the secretarial course actually, I stayed with a family friend, great family friend in London, and they had 3 children. One weekend I came back on a Friday night and she'd gone up to Norfolk or something with the kids, and he was like my second father, so I didn't think anything of it. And he said, let's go out for dinner. I was like, yeah, great, linking arm in arm with him, went and had half a bottle of wine each, came back, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we were sitting down just discussing stuff, and he said, oh, go on, why don't you read some Shakespeare or do something? And I was just laughing with him. And then suddenly he came up behind me and tried to kiss me and put his hands on my boobs. And this is a guy that I've known since I was 5.
Oh, no.
And I was 17 at the time. And
what did you do?
I ran upstairs, didn't have mobile phones in those days. I just ran upstairs and said, please just leave me alone. And I couldn't get out of the house. So I was stuck. It was the middle of the night. And he kept coming into my room and sitting on my bed and stroking me. And I just screamed and just told him to get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. I didn't sleep, obviously, that night. And I had a diary at the time, so I used to write everything in my diary. Thank goodness, because otherwise my mother would never have believed me. And, yeah, he left in the morning, and on my toothbrush was a note from him saying, I'm really sorry, please forgive me. So I put that inside my diary. And about a week later, his wife found the note. I never told anyone. I didn't want to tell them.
What do you mean she found the note? I thought it was in your diary.
Yeah, she lived in my diary.
Oh, were you living with them?
Yeah, so I was staying with them for a month.
Okay.
So I had a week left staying with them before the month was up. And I didn't want to tell anyone because, in my eyes, I didn't want to ruin a marriage. They've got 3 kids. It was something stupid that he did.
And you were able to fight him off.
Yeah, I was able to fight him off, but...
Good on you for that.
Just didn't know what to do.
You're so young, 17. And back in those days, we didn't have this understanding and knowledge. You know, there was no social media with the Me Too stories and all that sort of thing. There was nothing. So there was no conversations about it.
No, nothing.
So you haven't been given any life skills of how to even deal with the situation.
No. I told my sister-in-law about it and I told my best friend about it. And I went to stay with her for a few days. And I just don't want to go back. But then if I pack up my things and go, I'm going to have to tell someone what's happened. And I just didn't want to. Anyway, it was all taken out of my hands.
So what happened when she found the note?
So the day before I left, I came home and my bedroom was a bit of a mess and my diary was everywhere. And I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't even thinking about it. His wife put a note on my diary saying, so sorry, Phoebe, their little daughter, had accidentally gone into my diary. And anyway, she was being very, very frosty. And then I get this call from my sister-in-law saying, why don't you come over for the night and, leave a night early? And I said, okay, yeah, that should be fine. And it wasn't until I got on the bus that suddenly the penny dropped and I opened my diary and the note was missing. And then
she took the evidence.
Well, I got to my sister-in-law's house and I was in tears and she said, we know. So she had rung my mother at 3 o'clock in the morning, screaming down the phone, telling her that I was a slag and a slut and how dare I
lie
about things that haven't happened. And so she had the note. But she
so she was really going to protection mode of him.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's interesting.
And I spoke to my parents about it. My father was a bit of an old-fashioned guy. I loved him to pieces, but very old-fashioned. And he kind of looked at it as, you're a pretty girl, these things sometimes happen. I was like, well, not kind of what I wanted you to say. My mother didn't believe me.
She didn't believe it?
She didn't tell me at the time, but it wasn't until after she'd found evidence, she'd spoken to my sister-in-law and my best friend, who point-blankly said they'd seen the note and they'd heard from me what had happened, that she said, okay, I believe you. I just thought maybe you were flirting with him. Why would I flirt with someone who's my second father and that I haven't seen in years? It's just really bizarre.
Do you know where that comes from? From your mum having that attitude towards you?
I have no idea. I don't know whether she didn't know how to bring up daughters. I mean, she was the only girl herself. But my granny was amazing. She was like the love of my life. She only died a couple of years ago and she was just fantastic. And nearing the end of her life, she was just amazing, but I'll go into that later. Yeah, so, she said to me, I didn't believe you. I thought you were just making it up. I'm not an attention seeker. I'm not that sort of person. And why would I do that in the middle of everything that's going on? I'm trying to get into drama school and I'm trying to get a job. Oh, and then I'll just slip in a bit of sexual assault there. That'd be great.
It's interesting because the podcast I did with Rebecca, she was saying that 1 in 3 parents, these are Australian statistics, are unlikely to believe their child if they say they've been sexually harassed or assaulted.
Yeah. Which is
sad, isn't it? And I think there's a whole layer and there's loads of different reasons why, but there's evidence of it with your mum.
Yeah, well, it happened again about 2 years later when I was working in London and I went back down to Cornwall for a party. And I had this boyfriend at the time who was sort of seeing each other on and off. And that evening we decided to call it quits, just say, right, not going to go out anymore. But we were staying with his parents at the time in Cornwall. So we were at a party and it was at their house. So I stayed with him, stayed in their spare room. And at the end of the evening, he was drunk and came in and...
The boyfriend?
Me. Yeah.
Oh, and raped you?
He raped me. Put a sock in my mouth and held my arms back and raped me. So the night before that night, we'd agreed to split up and that was all cool. We were both fine about it. He obviously wasn't. I then had to go home the next morning, pretend nothing had happened, have a long shower, because I knew I couldn't tell my parents.
Because they wouldn't believe you?
They wouldn't believe me.
So you didn't report it?
I didn't tell anyone until about a year and a half ago. The whole of my life, didn't tell anyone.
Oh my gosh, and what impact has that had on you, having that happen to you, going through such a massive trauma and then not talking about it?
I think it all kicked off and me talking about myself and trying to get through everything was when my father died. And that's when I think everything just came to fruition and I realised that actually my childhood wasn't as great as I thought it was and there were lots of things wrong and there were lots of things that my mum did that really hurt me. But it wasn't until he died and we had to deal with her on her own that it all kind of kicked.
That was sort of the trigger for you.
That was looking back.
So have you been doing therapy and working through stuff now?
So I see a lady once a week and I'm on antidepressants. I didn't want to go on antidepressants for years for 2 years.
Did you recognise you had depression?
No, my doctor had to sit me down and spell it out for me about 30 million times.
Right. And why is that? You just didn't want to be vulnerable or you didn't want to accept
I didn't believe in depression. I thought depression was for people who were a bit pathetic and a bit wet and come on, just
back up and
get on with it.
Yeah.
But there are days that you can't get out of bed. There are days that you just hide under the duvet and cry all day. And those are the days that when my doctor just said, you've got 3 kids. It's like breaking an arm. If you've broken your arm or broken your leg, you would be in cast and you wouldn't be embarrassed about it. And it took me 2 months before I even told my husband I was on them.
Yeah, there's such a stigma involved with it, and there shouldn't be there shouldn't be. And, apparently the medication really changes the chemistry in your brain and makes you feel better.
Well,
why would you not want to feel better?
No, and it's actually for you. It's a brain default. It's not an emotional. Funnily enough, I always thought it was just...
it's not a choice.
It's not a choice. I don't choose not to, want to play with my kids in the morning or, not want to get out of bed. So it took a while to get the pills to, like, get the right amount of pills and make sure they worked. Touch wood, at the moment, it's pretty good.
Are you feeling better?
Yeah, but only really in the last couple of weeks. I've had ups and downs and merry-go-rounds, but I'm lucky I've got great friends and a great husband around me. But I never, again, I haven't told my mother this. She doesn't know. I'll never, ever let her know.
No, because she won't understand.
No.
And then she'll judge you.
She'll judge me and think, gosh, my husband died. It wasn't, you know, I was living with him and he was the one who was most important to me.
It sounds like she always makes things about her.
It's all about her. She's got some narcissistic traits in her. But what's being accentuated is that 7 years ago she was diagnosed with a brain tumour and breast cancer all at the same time, not connected, which was quite amazing. So she found that out on 2 weeks before Christmas that she had a brain tumour. So we flew back and they didn't know until Christmas Eve whether she had cancer all over her body or it was just in the brain. And then luckily we got a phone call on Christmas Eve to say it's just in her brain. So then in January, so I stayed there with my youngest who had just been born. I stayed there while she had her brain operation. And the thing with brain operations is it takes a long time to get the old you back.
Or maybe the old you doesn't come back.
Exactly.
It really can dramatically alter someone's personality, can't it?
It really can. And I think in the latter years of my father's life, he found it incredibly difficult having to deal with her. I think it accentuates her bad behaviour. It accentuates what she was like as when I was a child, but 10 times worse now.
So she's more judgmental and more mean.
More mean.
Can you give me some examples of how that's manifested since her operation?
She's had 2 operations now.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, she'll look at my children and say, this is a whole fat thing. She'll look at John and say, John, you're so fat. It's disgusting and you really need to put him on a diet. He's 8 years old.
Oh, that's awful. And that must trigger stuff in you from when you were younger. It really
does.
And your fear of not wanting your children to end up with eating disorders when they're older. I can imagine as a mother it must make you furious.
Absolutely furious. I mean, I've had some huge, huge rows with her about it, and so has my husband. My husband basically said, if you mention that one more time, I will walk out or I will slap you around the face. But for my son, he's only 8, it's quite difficult. He still doesn't quite, thankfully, grab it. But there were times when we were at home with children, with Mum, and he would say, Mummy, am I really fat? Do I need to go on a diet? And he said, I won't eat that because that's going to make me fat. And how awful. He was 6 or 7 at the time. It's just
terrible.
He's a rugby player. He'll be a rugby player. That's the kind of size he is. And now really it's more her dominating my relationship with my children. So she'll say things like, you're not doing a great thing. All those children are just a nightmare and you need to discipline them and it's your fault because you're a bad mother. And sort of pointed indirectly at me, all her sort of anger. And
sometimes people project their own inadequacies onto others. So maybe she's projecting her inadequacies as a parent onto you and saying that you're a terrible parent, but really perhaps it's about her. I mean, do you think she recognises?
No.
Doesn't recognise any of the mistakes she's made? Or
no, I don't think she would have a clue.
Really?
I really don't. She's so self-absorbed and it's all about her and everything revolves around her now. It's definitely got worse since my father died.
Is that because she's become more needy?
We've definitely become more needy, and she also, the day after my father died, found out she needed to have another brain operation. Which, I mean, poor thing,
that's hectic.
It's hectic. So not only did we have to bury my father, which devastated all of us just were lost without him. He was a gentleman, kind. I had a massively amazing relationship with him, especially the latter years of when Mum was going through chemo and being pretty horrible, especially to my children. He was a great grandfather, great father, and him and I just connected massively in those last few years. And
it's lovely that you had that.
Yeah, and he would tell me, ask me how to deal with Mum and what to do, and he would cry on my shoulders sometimes.
So he suffered from some sort of negative abuse from her as well?
Definitely, but he loved her so much, he would never ever admitted it. So we had his funeral and then had to go straight into a brain operation.
Oh, and you've got 3 young kids.
3 young kids, middle of winter, just after Christmas.
Flying back and forth. From Hong Kong to UK.
Yeah, I went back after Christmas, took them all home, and then 2 weeks later flew back again. Was with her through the brain operation and getting her back home. And then for best part of half a year, I think I spent without children looking after Mum and nursing her back to kind of health.
How did that feel, having to do that? Or, were you doing it out of did you want to do that? Were you doing it out of a sense of duty? How did that feel given your relationship with her all your life?
I think at that point in time, I hadn't really clicked about the past, and she being my mother and me being the only daughter, it was just like a natural thing to have to look after her. So I just went with the flow and just thought, this is what I need to do. And so I, put my children and my family on hold and went to my mother and was just there.
You're a good woman. You being in therapy in the last couple of years, has that made everything sort of become clear about how you were treated and what went on in your life and all that sort of thing?
Yes, and also how to treat her as well. Because, it's very easy to sit there and get really upset when she's rude to you or horrible to you. But instead of being upset, you've got to deal with it some other way.
So what do you do? I mean, this is really interesting for me.
Well, you just have to... There's no point in fighting with people like her. You can't argue with her because she'll argue until the cows come home.
You can't get through to her.
You can't get through to her. So if she's telling me my son's fat, I can't have an argument about it because she'll just keep saying that he's fat.
And even the threat of you not coming back or your husband leaving and not, won't change.
No.
And you can't explain to her how damaging that can be for his well-being and his self-esteem in the future.
She doesn't get it, which is just devastating, really. It's really hard.
Does this make you want to keep your kids away from her?
Yes. So we won't go and stay with her anymore. We always hire a house near her, but not with her.
And these are kind of practical things you can do to protect yourself and the kids.
Yeah, and it is little things like that my counsellor just knocked through my head. You've got to do things like this. You've got to do things for you, not for your mother. And I think it was when I came back from her second surgery and she'd had lots and lots of epileptic fits in between. So I was basically looking after her. I was her nurse. NHS were being rubbish and I was nursing her with all these seizures and I was having to pick her up off the floor and it was terrifying. So I had a month of that before her operation.
That sounds so stressful.
It was really stressful without child husband. Then I remember specifically leaving her with my brothers. For once, they were actually useful. My brothers can be quite useless. Big boys. I think it's just typical boys.
Yeah.
And I got on the plane and I was so excited about coming home. And I just thought, oh, God, I can't wait to see my children. And I think that's when everything fell apart. Because I got home and I remember the children were in the bath and I should be really excited to see them. I couldn't wait to see my husband. Instead, I had to go upstairs and I just burst into tears. And I think I'd been holding it together for so long. And I was so excited to see them that suddenly realised it wasn't just that. It wasn't just me. It was something else that was going on inside my head that I couldn't deal with.
So is this like you had a little breakdown?
Oh, yeah, I did, basically. And Simon didn't understand it to start with. And he did because my father had just died and blah, 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 blah. But I just couldn't cope with anything. I'd go to the doctor and I'd just be in floods and floods and floods of tears. And this is when it took probably 6 months for her to put me on antidepressants because I just didn't want to believe that I was depressed. And
so was she saying you need therapy?
Yeah,
you've got depression. You should try this medication. You're just like, no, why?
Because I was embarrassed.
Yeah,
totally embarrassed by the whole idea of being depressed.
Even though everything you've been through in your life and you can't even cut yourself the slack to understand why you might have depression.
Yeah, no, it really just didn't come to me at all. I couldn't stand the thought of being on pills to sort me out. And I think because my parents, specifically my mother, always, just get up and get off the floor and you'll be fine. You don't need any nurturing or loving or anything. Just get out the door and you'll be okay. And I think that's how I kind of treated it.
You felt like you were a failure?
Yeah, total failure. I felt like I'd disappointed all my family. I didn't have a clue how to get out of this hole. And God, I mean, for anyone listening, when you go through depression, it's one of the worst things you can possibly ever go through.
It sounds like such a heavy burden.
It's the way to explain it is, well, I suppose lots of people explain it like this, but you feel like you're in the darkest, deepest hole and you've got no ladder to get out of it and no way of getting out of it and you're drowning.
And even though you had all of those feelings, you still wouldn't accept when a medical professional said you have depression, you still wouldn't accept it.
No, my doctor calls it stubbornness.
It's craziness.
Eventually I went on them, and as I said, I didn't tell my husband.
What was it then that made you go, okay, maybe you're right, maybe I have depression, maybe I'll try?
I think when I realised that it wasn't just my life I was playing with, it was my children's life, and I had to think about them and my husband. And not myself.
Is that your doctor or your therapist that got that into your head?
No, this is before I saw a therapist.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
that took another 6 months for her to persuade me to go and see a psychologist.
Oh, my God.
And I went to her and I just said, I can't keep doing this. It's not fair on the children. It's not fair for my husband. I can't just be in fuzzy tears all the time.
And was there some little incident or some event that made you have this realisation?
Well, when I was in England, so just before I went on to antidepressants. Oh no, I was on them already actually. I definitely had a meltdown in England. It was when I was on the antidepressants, so I'm not sure how you're mixed with that, but yeah. I was on antidepressants and Mum asked me to move her house for her. So I went back for 6 weeks in the summer with 3 children, all under the age of 6.
Oh, what?
On my own, moved Mum from Suffolk back to Cornwall. Packed up her whole house myself, got up at 5 o'clock every morning, 4 o'clock sometimes, packed up her whole house. Meanwhile, she was just slagging off the children, shouting at them all, telling John how fat he was, and telling Anna how annoying she was when she's, one of the most perfect little girls, and then telling my youngest that he's got something wrong with him. And it was just a total nightmare. We had so many arguments. She just couldn't see what she was doing wrong. She would get up in the morning and start unpacking stuff I'd packed. I was like, what are you doing? And
Sophia, it sounds awful. And I'm not a doctor, but it sounds like it's a situation you just shouldn't be putting yourself in.
No,
at all.
No, and
you should be.
I rang my husband every night, cried down the phone to him. Even my brothers, I was crying down the phone. I just said, I can't deal with this. This is just a nightmare. Anyway, eventually moved her to Cornwall, and halfway down we stopped in a B&B, and Mum just lost her shit on me and just told me what an awful mother I was again and how awfully badly behaved these children were. We went out to dinner and we were in this sort of posh pub place, and they were just running around. They had been in the car for 4 hours. They were just running around letting off steam.
Being normal kids.
And she just totally lost it, and I just totally lost it on her. And we went back to this B&B, and the poor B&B people, they had this huge, great row. I had my cousin staying with me. She helped me do a little bit of the move. I just sat in the room with her, and I was just in floods of tears. I was like, how can she be so unthankful?
Yeah,
you've I've done.
Packed up your whole life, gone over there, moved everything.
It was awful. And then the next morning, we got down to Cornwall eventually, got into her new house. And I think I was just so relieved that my brothers were there and I had other people to take over, and I had a full-on seizure.
Did you?
I ended up in the back of an ambulance for 3 hours. I just went into, I think it was just a total stress episode.
Right.
So since then I have panic attacks quite often. That almost.
That was like the big one. That was the big panic attack, and now you're having smaller ones after.
This was the big one that my doctor said, you need to go and see a therapist. You need to go and see someone. And I was in contact with her in London when she was in Hong Kong.
Right.
Over emails and stuff, and she was being my brick basically and supporting me through the whole 6 weeks of being in Cornwall and telling me what I should and shouldn't be doing. And then when I told her I'd had a seizure, she was just like, right, you need to get your ass out of there, get home.
Yeah. And did you do that? Did you
leave?
I
only had a few days left, so yeah, we left pretty quickly after that. And then the worst thing she said to me, so after I came out of the ambulance and I got upstairs, there was no sympathy at all from my mother, and she just turned around to me and said, well, maybe when you go back to Hong Kong, you'll have an MRI scan and they'll find you've got a brain tumour just like me. Then you'll know what it's like.
Oh, my gosh, what an unusually weird
I know.
woman.
So I was just my brothers and I looked at each other and we thought, I'm too exhausted to even fight this. I can't even describe how I feel right now. But can you imagine?
I know, it's chopping you off at the knees when you're on your knees.
Yeah. So then I got back and declined into massive, like really bad depression, and had to go on different antidepressants.
Yeah, try to find the right one and the right level. And you started therapy.
I started therapy, which really, really, really helped.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, just talking about stuff. This time 2 years ago, I'd never been able to sit here and talk about stuff.
I know, it's amazing. You know, I admire your courage and being able to share all of this. And what you're saying is going to resonate with so many people out there. It really is. And that's why this sort of thing is so valuable, because if there's one person out there in this kind of situation who hasn't been able to reach out to their counsellor or their GP or their psychologist, hopefully they will. And at the end of this podcast, I'll give some numbers that people can use to contact if they're in crisis or need help. But, you know, it's incredibly brave of you and really courageous, but also you can see that you're getting all this self-awareness and you're making connections with what's happened to you when you were younger and where you are now. And also the fact that you understand that you can't control your mother's behaviour means that now you've just got to work on how you respond to it.
Yeah,
and protect yourself from it as much as possible.
Exactly, and that's what I've got to do, really. And part of this process in coming to do this interview with you is part of my healing, as well as helping anyone else out, because if there's anyone out there who feels like they're depressed or just can't get out of bed, go and see someone, go and talk to someone.
Yeah, just start with your GP.
Yeah, start with GP. Yeah. That's the best way, because I couldn't even talk to friends about it, or my husband. It took a long time before I admitted to any of my friends that I had depression.
Did your friends or your husband, did they realise what was going on? Were they surprised when you said you had depression? Or they all kind of like, well, yeah, it's obvious?
My husband was really supportive. I was expecting him to be, not disappointed, but I was expecting him to be a bit worried and a bit anxious. And he was just really, really supportive, and he has been ever since. And he's always been, you've got to do the right thing. It's like breaking a leg or breaking an arm. And if you had diabetes, you'd take the insulin. Absolutely. So, and then when I told my friends, I think they kind of, I've only really told my best buddies, but I think they've kind of like, oh, now you've just suddenly bloody realised. Yeah, thank goodness for that. Yeah. And also, it wasn't fair on them. I was just crying. I couldn't get out of dinner without bursting into tears about something. And I really feel great empathy for you. It's been such a difficult journey. It's been a really difficult journey, but in a way it's been an incredible journey. To be able to sit here opposite you and talk about depression, anxiety, anorexia, my father dying, without even bursting into tears, talking about my father's death, and all this kind of stuff shows how far you've come. It shows how far I've come, and it shows what you're doing is working. Yeah. The medication and the therapy, it's working. And did you ever feel suicidal? There were times when I was lying in bed and I thought, oh, I've got a whole load of sleeping pills next door to me, and I could just take a whole load and then I'll just go to sleep quietly. But then again, my children just popped up in my head, and I just thought, no, you can't do that. So it's just that feeling of wanting to check out, but knowing that you wouldn't actually do it. I wasn't to the point where I was on the edge of a bridge about to fall off it. But I think had I left it another couple of months, I would have been close to it. And I also have terrible insomnia from all this. So I don't sleep at all. So I'm on the sleeping pills still now. I know, I have the same problem because of menopause. So it's awful. It's terrible. And when you've got 3 kids to get up in the morning and take to school, and you've had no sleep, and that tends to be when I have like panic attacks and stuff, when I've not had any sleep. Have you tried, here's me coming up with ideas, but have you tried any yoga? No, I've tried meditation. Yes. Yeah. I need to do that more. Yeah. That kind of some well-being and mindfulness stuff mindfulness might be helpful. Really good. That's another thing I would never have. If you talked about mindfulness a couple of years ago, I would have closed the door on you and laughed. No, but it works. It really does work. And there's some really awesome apps, Yeah, I've got one of the apps. There's Headspace, Calm. There's loads of them out there. Reach Out, Breathe. But even just spending 5 minutes before you get up in the morning, what I tend to do is take my dogs for a hike, get to the top of my favourite mountain, and that's mindfulness too. I just stop, either listen to one of my apps, or I just stop and look out at the beautiful view. And we're so lucky in Hong Kong. I actually use podcasts.
I actually just immersed myself in podcasts to help me sleep.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I found really, really helpful for falling asleep during menopause, was listening to podcasts.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Yeah, it's great. Hong Kong Confidential. Listen to that one.
Yes, definitely.
You've only been doing therapy for a few months now?
About a year.
A year.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And
you'll continue with it for quite a while, do you think? It's no good. I do it regularly. Like, I just go back to it for top-ups.
Yeah, and I think from now on it's more like, well, at the moment, it's sort of top-up, exactly. So I'll go kind of once a month just to check in that I'm not going to suddenly burst into tears and, you know, totally fall to pieces. And if I can get out of a therapy session without crying, then no, I'm fine.
I know, it's great. And do you feel like you're a better mother now, and that you're a better wife, and that you're a better person, and do you feel happier?
Yes. Yes, all the above. And I think, again, it's just talking about stuff. And if you can talk about depression and anxiety and
it normalises it a little bit more, doesn't it? And it takes away the shame and the guilt. Yeah.
Well, I always sort of think when I'm at the school gate waiting for the kids, I look around and I think, God, I wonder how many other mums feel like me right now. Want to bury their head in the sand, don't want anyone to come up to me and say hi, don't want to talk to anyone, just want to collect the kids and run and get out.
Probably quite a lot.
And you know what? There probably are. And that's a funny thing when you start talking about it. I've had a couple of friends who said,
me too.
Me too.
I know.
And then that's great, because then you've got someone else who you can talk to and who's been through it. And I've got another friend who went through it years ago, and she's now out of it, and she doesn't take any pills now, but she's like, just call me whenever you need to scream and shout or cry or anything, just call me. And it's having that support net group. If you don't talk to anyone about it, then no one's ever going to know, and you just get worse and worse and worse. And
people are all caught up in their own lives, so they might sense something's wrong, but they don't necessarily, you know, have the time or the energy or the space to sort of delve into what's going on. There's something about us, I think, as women, it's so hard for us to ask for help.
Yeah.
Isn't it? We feel it's so hard to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and pride as well. And you just feel like, you know, you're
and that whole sense of being a failure, when it's not being a failure. Look at what you've dealt with. Look at, you're a survivor.
Yeah.
You know, you've come through so much.
I'm still not quite there yet. I still can't stand up and say, I love myself and all that kind of thing.
Well, I think it's hard for any of us, even if we haven't been through all the sort of traumas.
To sort of feel proud of myself for what I've done and stuff like that. I still not quite there yet, but it's good to know that I'm almost there.
Yeah, I think you'll get there. And I think it's things like this that, you know, you might go away afterwards and think, wow, you know, when you put it out there, it stops going around and around in your head. It's out there in front of you, and then it's like, wow, look at all of that, and look at where I am, and look at what I've done, and look at how I might be helping others.
Yeah.
And I hope that does bring you a sense of pride after this, because it should, because it's really quite amazing.
I definitely came in here thinking this is a way for me to just close a chapter in a way, close a book and just say, right, I can breathe and I can move on and I can carry on with my therapy, but I don't need to think too much about the past so much, because there's nothing you can do about it.
No, you're not going to change it. It's really about how you now view it and how you approach it, isn't it?
I can sit there and cry every day that my mum's a bitch and my mother-in-law's also a bitch, but that's another story.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could sink myself further and further down, but there's nothing you can do about it. But you can only get there really by acknowledging it and getting help.
Yeah. And therapy is incredible, isn't it? If you find the right person that you connect with, it can have such a positive impact, can't it? And you can have revelations and make connections about things that you never thought possible.
Yeah.
You know, you can be talking about something and you'll end up completely somewhere else that you never even thought of, and that will have some link back to your childhood or some impact on the way you feel now. And it's quite amazing how it can work, isn't it?
Oh, it's totally amazing. I mean, I went through 2 or 3 therapists, I think 2 actually, and found the lady I love, and she's just fantastic. And I kind of feel like I can almost go in there and lie on her sofa and be a real cliche and, right, okay, I'm just going to lie on the sofa and close my eyes and just talk.
Well, it's so interesting because in America, if you don't have a therapist, you're abnormal.
Yes,
do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like you have a GP, a dentist, and a therapist.
Yes.
Whereas in England, you know, oh gosh, as soon as you get onto therapy, there's something's wrong. But it's not. It's actually not necessarily. And I mean, it is in your situation because of what you've been through, but none of it's your fault.
No, but they also, I think, English think that you're bringing up stuff that you shouldn't bring up. You could just, you know, you should bury it and put it in a box and leave it.
But it's that whole stiff upper lip, isn't it? The stiff upper lip, put it aside and we'll just soldier on. But I think people are starting to become more aware now that in the long term that can be really quite damaging.
Yeah.
Can't it? And like you say, you've got to be the best person that you can be so that you can raise your children to be happy, successful human beings. Well, not even successful, happy human beings.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main goal. As long as my children can talk to me about anything and everything, and that's, you know, something that I'm hoping that I can change and not be like my mother was and be a totally open book to them.
Do you ever catch yourself sounding or being like your mother?
It's a good question. Yes, I think so. And
and I hate it.
My husband's picked up on it. He said, "You just sound just like your mother." And I was like, "Do not tell me that. That's the worst thing you could possibly tell me."
I know.
But yes, odd bits and pieces, definitely. Yeah. And she's a good old gossiper. She loves gossip. But now her gossip has just gone into total bitch mode gossip. It's just not. It's not nice gossip.
Now you're in therapy. Yeah. What steps are you going to take to protect yourself from the way that your mum treats you?
Well, as I said.
Living in the other house, staying in the other house when you visit.
I only speak to her once a week or once every 2 weeks, and I limit the time. If I'm with Simon will put his stopwatch on, and he'll monitor the time that I'm with her on the phone to, and he will just...
Okay, see, that's brilliant. So he's really working with you to help you set your boundaries.
He definitely knows that I can't deal with my mother, and... So yes, but at the same time, I also know I'm the only child, and she's now got to go back on chemo.
You're the only daughter.
I'm the only daughter, rather, not the only child.
Because you're not the only child. So that's really interesting that you said that.
Yeah.
Is that a little indicator that your brothers aren't stepping up, and is that something you should address?
Yeah, I think if you spoke to any of my friends and family friends, they would all say the same. That I think they, even though I live in Hong Kong, they rely a lot on me to pick up the pieces and drop everything. I mean, when Mum had her operation, I had brothers who lived an hour or two away and they didn't even come up for it.
What? Okay, so you need to sort out some boundaries with your brother. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor. Yeah. But that just, it seems to me that out of this conversation, this is a little sign that you could perhaps have conversations with your brothers about expectations and relationships and set some boundaries there as well, which could be quite healthy.
Yes, definitely. I think that's something I need to put in place.
Isn't that interesting that I picked up on that?
Yes. We see, so Mum's got to have chemo. And I said to Simon that I'll go back for a couple of weeks and help her. And he's just like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
You can't.
See, look, you're repeating old... I'm not a doctor, but you're repeating old patterns here.
If you spoke to my doctor, if my doctor listens to this, you're not going.
No, and just from everything you've said, my initial reaction or my way of thinking is, don't you have enough money to throw something at it? Can't you get a nurse? Can't you pay somebody to go and help her?
Yeah, I could do, but she is so stubborn. She will send them packing and say she's perfectly all right.
Okay, then I think you need to have conversations with your brothers.
Yeah.
And this is part of your boundary setting, and that maybe...
I'm having a counselling session right now.
I know. It's free. I think, and I'm not a doctor, I think this is a big part of the therapy that you're going through, and this is a perfect opportunity for you to show what you've learned and set some boundaries, and you've got other siblings.
Yeah.
Send one of them in. Send their wives in. Send their kids in. I don't know who's there, but there's got to be other family members, and you need to say, I'm working on some stuff. I haven't been well, and this is what I need.
It's very funny you say that, because it's one of the most difficult things, I think, for me and probably loads of people, trying to even think or even put yourself in any position. I've always been at the back of the pecking order. I don't really...
Exactly. And you know, that's very typical of people with depression, because they feel like they don't deserve it.
Yes, yeah.
And you do deserve it.
Oh, well.
And so you need to make that happen because, I mean, your husband could help, but ultimately you're working on setting boundaries, and it's so hard when you're looking at yourself. I can see the boundaries you need to set quite clearly. But if I was looking at the boundaries I need to set with my issues, it's much harder to see them. I think.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
Yeah. So
an outside perspective.
Yeah. This is why therapy can be so helpful, because, and I'm not a therapist, but this is why it can be so helpful, because you can get a different perspective. You can get solutions. You can get options. You can have other ideas of ways to cope. And I think that it can be really, really healthy. But clearly you have not put yourself first in your life, and it's had a huge detrimental effect on you, and now you're doing all this work. Now's not the time to put yourself back in that situation.
Yeah, you're right. We'll have to see what happens next year.
Yeah, good luck.
Oh, this year in 2018 now.
And I know that's easy for me to say because I don't have that whole family history, and you still obviously love your parents and want to help them and all that sort of stuff. But
that's the thing. There's definitely a love-hate relationship. You can't hate. Well, I don't hate my mother. I just hate the person she is.
Yeah, hate her behaviour.
Hate her behaviour.
Yeah. But, I mean, even if you do end up going back, you've got to still set boundaries and you've got to bring in the other people to help as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you're there, you've got to have... If you've got 5 brothers, you're in it once every 6 days.
Yeah.
If they're all around, you know, there's things that you can do.
Yeah.
Anyway, look at me.
Thanks for the guns.
Yeah. I'm an expert. Oh, gosh. That's amazing. Have you, in your therapy, been looking at your relationship with your mother, the anorexia, the rape, all of that stuff? Or have you just been focusing on one particular area?
No, that's what brought everything out, I think. So it triggered off. She sort of brought out, she's like, I don't think you're really focusing on the right thing here. I think there's something else.
The counsellor brought it out. Your psychologist brought it out.
Yeah, like she was the one who basically said, I think we need to go further in. And that's when I, for the first time, told anyone that I was raped or sexually abused or any of this.
And how did that feel to put it out there for the first time in, 20 years?
I threw up about 3 times before I actually walked into her room.
Because you knew it was coming, did you?
Oh, I knew I was going to do it. I told my lovely doctor I'm very close to before, and she'd actually sent an email to her just to warn her what was going to happen. Be prepared for a big session.
Yeah.
And... well, now over time, I just think it's one of the best things I've done.
Because what effect has it had on you to actually talk about it?
Well, it's normal, not normalised it, obviously, but it's normalised that these things happen and that it's okay to talk about them.
Yeah,
embarrassed, because I was totally embarrassed by everything.
Yes.
You know, totally embarrassed by being raped, totally felt like I'd just given what he wanted and... you know, and there are probably loads of girls out there like that as well.
Loads.
And it's really important to think you're not alone and it's not your fault.
And it's shame, isn't it?
It's a total shame.
Yeah.
And you just feel worthless and shitty and you just feel like, you know, you want to bury it. And that's exactly what I did. I buried it. And luckily at the time I was anorexic, so I didn't get pregnant or anything. But,
right,
you know,
yeah, because you hadn't had a period for 3 years.
No.
Oh, my God.
So, but yeah, I mean... it was amazing afterwards. I came out.
Did you feel lighter?
Oh my God, lighter. Every time I come into her sessions, I come away exhausted.
Yes, but feeling
lighter.
better.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Then did you tell Simon about it?
Yeah. So then.
And was that the first time you'd mentioned it?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, how did he handle it?
He was quite aggressive about it. I mean,
angry.
Angry. Yeah, I think. If we lived anywhere close to this guy, ever saw him again, there would be trouble. There would be trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But he was also really upset. There were quite a few tears, and I talked about basically everything to him, and I let everything down. And I actually wrote everything down, and I said, I don't think I can talk about it all now. So I wrote it all down, and I just gave it to him like a letter.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Like
so that's a good tip.
Letter of everything that I had been keeping from him and how I felt and what had gone on in the past. And I wrote it all down because I knew I couldn't properly tell someone, and that in itself made me feel much better. In fact, writing everything down it's
another mindfulness activity, isn't it? Journaling.
Yeah,
it can be really helpful.
But it was incredible to write that letter to Simon. It took me probably 2 days,
right,
and a lot of soul searching, a lot of deep breaths, and a lot of tears.
What were your fears? Were you afraid he would reject you or be angry with you or upset you hadn't told him after all these years? Or
I think upset, probably. He's not the angry type. Angry at the other person, but not angry with me. And again, ashamed. I just felt so ashamed and that I'd let someone do this to me. And, you know, it's just one of those things, again, that people, women and men, should not be afraid of talking about.
No, even you using that language of let somebody do this to me, it's not really you letting him do that to you. Rape is a crime of power.
Yeah.
And he disempowered you and raped you, and you didn't let it happen.
Yeah.
It's interesting the language that you use, and that's something that we all need to be aware about when we talk about our bodies, when we talk about anything in our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've still got a long way ahead of me, I think.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're really on the right path,
yes,
though.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's some really key points here that for the listeners who are struggling with anything and haven't sought support, the key things is try to let go of that shame, allow yourself to be vulnerable, go and see somebody who is trained and can get help. You know, it's okay to talk to your friend or your sibling but you need somebody who's got the skills to really talk you through stuff and work through stuff and diagnose you, get medication, do all those things if you need it, whatever works for you. There's different things for other people, and doing all the mindfulness and well-being stuff on top of it.
Yeah, I think for me the worst thing was the antidepressants, actually going on the pills. By far, just the thought of being put on something that's going to change me. And I'm sure that's likewise in many, many people.
I think so.
And it's a shameful thing again.
I know, and there's a real stigma with it. And mental health issues are not spoken about like physical health issues. And there is a stigma, unfortunately, which is, the things are changing, and this kind of podcast helps with it. But I think that people often do have a real battle with taking the medication, and it can really mean that they don't feel as they felt.
Get better. And if you don't get better, you're no use to anyone.
Yeah.
To start with, when I was first on the medication, I was very much, right, I'm only going to stay on it for 6 months and then I'm going to come off it. And then I get to 6 months and I feel really bad about myself because I think I haven't done what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I've not been good enough. I haven't got myself again.
You've got a massive thing about not a failure, haven't you?
Yeah.
And not achieving these little goals and then really beating yourself up about it.
Well, now I've persuaded myself to not have a time frame on these drugs that I'm on, just to see how it goes. It might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 5 years, it might be longer, who knows? And I'm now got to the point where I'm happy with that.
That's great. I have a friend who was on Prozac and on antidepressants for depression, and every so often she would come off them and feel awful. She felt awful, but she kept trying, and then I was just like, why do you keep trying? And then she just accepted that this is what she needs, and she's going to be doing it for the rest of her life. And she was cutting, and she had eating disorders when she was a teenager. It goes way back to her childhood. And I think it's something that I'm really proud of her to see her now in the stage of accepting that this is what she needs to do. Yeah. And she's a really, really happy woman.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I didn't mention is I came off one of my drugs about 8 weeks ago because I put on loads and loads of weight. And again, for someone who's body conscious, I was just like, this drug, Wonder Drug, I was feeling amazing, but I was just putting on like a kilo a week. And I was just, no, I can't do it. And I went to my doctor and said, I can't do it. She said, you have to do it. You can't come off it.
Yeah.
And I just emailed her later and said, I've done it. I'm doing it. I'm cutting off. And I was fine for the first week. And then I went downhill very, very, very quickly.
Interesting.
And I was a total mess again. I felt like I'd gone back to square one. I couldn't get out of bed. I was crying. This was only 5 or 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. But when you stop any of those drugs immediately, the reaction's really severe. You're meant to taper off, aren't you?
I did taper off.
Oh, okay.
I tapered off pretty quickly.
Okay.
I didn't taper off how I should have done.
Yeah.
I basically ignored everyone else's advice because I just couldn't bear not being able to get into my jeans or anything. I think because of my past experience of anorexia and stuff, I still have, body image of...
Of course, and that makes complete sense, doesn't it? But that's something you're going to have to work on because your mental health is more important than the size of your ass.
This is what I decided, but actually I've now found a different drug that hasn't made me feel weight. Thank goodness. So I basically went back and said, I can't do this other drug, but is there anything else out there? And they found something else for me.
And this is another little lesson. There's loads of different drugs out there that do the same thing. And you can try different things until you find the one that works best for you. And I think a lot of people try one thing, and if it doesn't work, or they put on weight, or they can't focus, or they don't feel joy or whatever, then they go, oh, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah, and it takes a long time. I mean, it took me, 6 or 7 months to get the right pills right. And
that sounds pretty quick to me. I know people where it's taken a lot longer.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to in the future now?
Well, I'm looking forward to 2018. I was born 28, 8 o'clock in the morning, so 8 has got to be my lucky number.
Brilliant.
So this year's just going to be my year.
Brilliant.
Whatever happens, it's going to be my year.
Well, this is a great way to start it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So it's a good way to start the year. And everything is going to be peachy keen. And if it's not, then I'll deal with it.
Yeah, and you'll get help.
I don't want to be over optimistic, but I want to be positive.
Yeah, and I think being positive and recognising that if it all does go Pete Tong, you've got the tools now to allow yourself to be vulnerable, accept that things might be make you feel like you're a failure. Go and see your GP, go and see your psychologist and check your medication.
Yeah.
There's some real key things that you can do. And I think that's what a lot of people need to do in these situations is have strategies, set up plans, and having somebody to help you do that can be really, really useful.
Yeah, if you don't have that plan in place and you're on your own,
you're at sea, aren't you?
You're totally lost.
Yeah.
And I was.
Yeah, well, I'm really, really incredibly proud of you. It's been
an
absolute pleasure to meet you and hear your story. Thank you so much for sharing. I know that it's taken so much courage and bravery to get out there and talk about this, but my gut feeling is it's going to be incredibly helpful for a lot of listeners out there. So, Sophia, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
All right.
Ciao.
If you feel that you need support with any of the issues discussed in this podcast, please contact your local lifeline or crisis line in your area. You can also visit your local GP, and if you're in Hong Kong, please contact the Samaritans on their hotline on 2896 0000.
Hi Confidants, I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.